Do not faint on me tonight, Clara. I am running out of ways to save you. Clara Whitmore pressed one trembling hand against the polished elevator wall, as another wave of nausea rolled through her body. The fluorescent lights above her flickered once. Then again. It was 2:11 in the morning on the 47th floor of Callaway Capitol, and the entire building felt eerily silent except for the low mechanical hum surrounding her. Her vision blurred. She squeezed her eyes shut and forced herself to breathe slowly through the sharp ache tightening beneath her ribs. The baby kicked hard enough to make her gasp. "Please," she whispered under her breath. "Not tonight." Her swollen feet throbbed inside cheap black flats that had lost their support weeks ago. One strap had been repaired with clear tape. Her maternity blouse pulled tightly across her stomach now, though she had spent 10 careful minutes this morning pinning her blazer closed so nobody at work would notice how much larger she looked. But hiding was becoming impossible, especially from him. The elevator jolted violently. Clara stumbled forward with a cry, barely catching herself against the chrome railing before the entire car shuddered to a stop. Darkness swallowed the elevator for one terrifying second before the emergency lights blinked on in dim red strips along the ceiling. Her heartbeat slammed painfully against her chest. No. No, no, no. Panic rose instantly in her throat. She stabbed the emergency button repeatedly. Nothing happened. The signal bars on her phone disappeared one by one. Perfect. Tears burned behind her eyes. She had worked 16 straight hours reconciling financial reports because Vanessa Sterling insisted the merger documents had to be finalized before sunrise. Clara knew exactly why. Vanessa wanted her exhausted, wanted her to fail, wanted the pregnant assistant to finally quit before Adrian Callaway noticed she still existed. Another cramp twisted low in her stomach. Sharper this time. Clara bent forward instinctively, gripping her belly as fear spread through her entire body. The doctor had warned her about stress contractions last month. Too much pressure could hurt the baby. But rest required money. And money was something Clara no longer had. Her rent was already 12 days late. The hospital bills sat unopened inside her apartment kitchen drawer. The elevator doors suddenly rattled from the outside. Clara froze. A second later, a deep voice cut through the silence. "Step away from the doors." Her stomach dropped harder than the elevator had. Adrian Callaway. Of course it was him. The billionaire owner of the entire building. The coldest man she had ever met. The man she secretly hated more than anyone alive. "Maintenance is on the way," he said through the metal doors. Calm. Controlled. Infuriatingly emotionless. Clara swallowed painfully. "I am fine." "You do not sound fine." She closed her eyes. Even his voice carried authority. Low and sharp like a blade sliding across glass. "I said I am fine." Silence followed for 2 long seconds. Then his voice returned closer this time. "Open the emergency latch manually. I can pull the doors apart enough to get you out." Clara stared down at her shaking hands. Another cramp hit so suddenly that a soft cry escaped her lips before she could stop it. The silence outside vanished instantly. "Clara." His tone changed. Harder now. "Dangerous." "What is wrong?" "Nothing." "Do not lie to me." She hated how quickly tears filled her eyes hearing that. Hated how exhausted she sounded. Hated that he could hear it too. "I am just tired." The doors suddenly forced apart 3 inches with a harsh metallic groan. A large hand appeared between them. Strong fingers gripping steel. Then his face came into view beneath the emergency lights. Adrian Callaway looked terrifying even at 2 in the morning. Dark charcoal coat. Loosened tie. Storm gray eyes sharp enough to cut through walls. But the second he saw her doubled over inside the elevator, something shifted across his expression. Clara had seen him destroy executives during meetings without blinking once. She had watched grown men leave his office shaking. Yet now he looked almost alarmed. "Are you in pain?" he asked quietly. Clara straightened immediately despite the ache burning through her abdomen. "I can handle it." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That was not my question." She forced herself to glare at him. "Why do you even care?" For one brief moment, neither of them moved. The red emergency lights painted sharp shadows across his face, while the city glittered silently through the distant office windows behind him. Then Adrian looked directly at her trembling hand pressed protectively over her stomach. His entire expression darkened. Because, he said softly, you look like you are about to collapse. Another violent cramp hit her before she could answer. Clara gasped and lost her balance completely. Adrian moved instantly. The elevator doors groaned wider as he forced himself halfway inside, and caught her against his chest before she hit the floor. His arms felt dangerously solid around her shaking body. Warm, steady, safe. Clara hated that most of all. She looked up breathlessly into his cold gray eyes just as the baby kicked hard between them. Adrian froze. Completely froze. The elevator fell silent. And for the first time since Clara Whitmore started working at Callaway Capital, her billionaire CEO boss looked genuinely afraid. Clara could feel the steady hammer of Adrian Callaway's heartbeat beneath her cheek, and somehow that terrified her more than the pain twisting through her stomach. His arm tightened around her waist as the elevator swayed faintly again. Look at me, he said quietly. She hated that she obeyed instantly. The red emergency lights carved sharp shadows across his face, making his gray eyes look almost silver. Concern flickered there for half a second before his expression hardened again into the cold control she recognized. Can you stand? He asked. Clara pulled herself away from him immediately, ignoring the dizziness rushing through her head. I said I am fine. Adrian stared at her in silence. His expensive coat sleeve was wrinkled where she had grabbed him. That alone felt wrong. Men like Adrian Callaway did not belong in cramped elevators at 2 in the morning holding exhausted pregnant assistants together while they nearly fainted. Men like him belonged in penthouses and private jets and glossy magazine covers beside women with perfect smiles. Not here. Not with her. Clara forced herself upright and adjusted her blazer over her stomach again. Pointless habit by now. Adrian noticed anyway. He noticed everything. You are 7 months pregnant, he said flatly. You almost collapsed. Heat flooded her face instantly. You were not supposed to know that. You hid it badly. Her jaw tightened. Maybe I did not want my billionaire boss discussing my body. His gaze sharpened dangerously. I am discussing your health. Same difference. Another silence stretched between them. Somewhere above, metal clanged as maintenance workers attempted to restart the elevator system. Clara wrapped her arms tightly around herself, suddenly cold despite the stuffy heat trapped inside the small space. Adrian watched her for a moment before slowly removing his charcoal coat. Put this on. No. That was not a suggestion. I do not need your help. His eyes narrowed slightly. You can barely stand. I have been standing my entire life. The words escaped before she could stop them. Adrian's expression changed again. Smaller this time. Harder to read. Clara immediately looked away. She regretted sounding emotional in front of him more than almost anything. Especially him. Adrian represented every part of life she no longer trusted. Power. Wealth. Men who controlled entire rooms with one sentence, while people like her struggled to pay electric bills. She had watched him fire 200 employees last winter without changing expression once. She still remembered the silence afterward. The crying in the women's restroom. The security guards escorting people out carrying cardboard boxes while Adrian continued walking through the lobby like none of it touched him. That day she decided she hated him. Hated the perfect suits. Hated the cold voice. Hated how calm he stayed while everyone else panicked. But the worst part was that he always noticed her anyway. Every late report. Every overtime shift. Every time she skipped lunch pretending coffee was enough. He never said anything kind. Never smiled at her. Yet somehow she always felt his attention following her through the office like a shadow she could not escape. Why are you still here this late? Adrian asked suddenly. Clara laughed softly without humor. Because Vanessa said the merger reports had to be finished before morning. His expression instantly darkened. Vanessa approved this schedule? I am an employee, Mr. Callaway. I do not exactly get a vote. Do not call me that right now. The quiet command caught her off guard. Clara looked up. Adrian was watching her too closely again, like he was trying to solve something impossible. Then what should I call you? She asked before thinking. His jaw flexed once. Adrian. The way he said it sent an uncomfortable warmth through her chest. Clara hated that too. A loud mechanical groan suddenly echoed through the shaft above them. The elevator jerked violently before the lights flickered back to full brightness. Clara stumbled again from the movement. Adrian caught her instantly. One hand pressed firmly against her lower back. The other steadied her elbow with controlled gentleness that felt dangerously intimate inside the cramped space. She could smell cedar and expensive cologne on his shirt now. Clean. Warm. Safe. Her pulse betrayed her immediately. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes dropped briefly toward her mouth before returning to her face. The tension between them shifted so suddenly it stole the air from the elevator. Clara stepped back first. Do not do that. His brow furrowed slightly. Do what? Look at me like that. Adrian stared at her for one long second. Then the elevator doors finally slid open. Two maintenance workers stood outside looking nervous and sweaty beneath fluorescent hallway lights. Sorry about that, sir, one of them said quickly. System failure on 47. Adrian never looked away from Clara. Call the building physician, he said coldly. Now. Clara immediately shook her head. No. Absolutely not. Adrian turned toward her slowly. You nearly collapsed. I cannot afford private doctors. You work for me. That makes it my problem. The words hit harder than they should have. Clara swallowed painfully as exhaustion washed through her again. Somewhere deep inside her stomach, the baby kicked once more. Adrian's eyes dropped instantly to the movement beneath her blazer. His entire body went still again. And for the second time that night, Clara realized her billionaire CEO boss looked at her pregnancy like it personally frightened him. The private medical office on the top executive floor smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive leather. Clara sat stiffly on the edge of the examination bed, while a middle-aged physician wrapped the blood pressure cuff tighter around her arm. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Chicago glittered beneath freezing rain, the city lights blurred by streaks of water sliding across the glass. It was nearly 3 in the morning now. Her entire body ached with exhaustion. Adrian stood near the doorway speaking quietly into his phone. Even whispering, he somehow controlled the entire room. Reschedule Tokyo, he said coldly. I do not care what the board says tonight. Clara looked away quickly before he noticed her listening. The doctor released the pressure valve with a concerned frown. Your blood pressure is dangerously high for 31 weeks. Clara forced a tired smile. I have been under stress. That is not stress, the doctor said firmly. That is physical exhaustion. Adrian ended the call immediately. Explain. The physician turned toward him. She needs rest immediately. No overtime. No elevated stress levels. If this continues, both mother and baby could be at risk. The room fell silent. Clara hated the way Adrian's expression changed hearing those words. The billionaire CEO who terrified investors suddenly looked furious at something he could not control. I am okay, Clara said quickly. I just need sleep. You need more than sleep, the doctor corrected gently. Have you been eating properly? Clara hesitated. Wrong answer. Adrian noticed instantly. Clara. His voice dropped lower. Answer him. She crossed her arms defensively over her stomach. I eat. The doctor sighed softly while removing the cuff. How many meals today? Clara stared at the floor. Adrian's jaw tightened. How many? Coffee counts, she muttered weakly. No, both men answered at the same time. Heat rushed into her cheeks. Humiliation twisted through her chest sharper than the cramps now fading beneath the medication the doctor had given her. She hated feeling weak. Hated being looked at like something fragile. Especially by Adrian Calloway. The doctor scribbled notes onto a chart. You also show signs of dehydration. Your ankles are swollen, and your stress contractions are increasing. If you keep pushing yourself like this, your body will force you to stop eventually. Clara swallowed hard. She could not afford to stop. Rent was already overdue. The heating in her apartment barely worked. Her maternity leave had not even started, and she still had not bought a crib. Fear pressed painfully against her ribs every waking hour. Adrian moved closer suddenly. Leave us. The doctor looked between them once before nodding quietly and exiting the office. The moment the door shut, silence flooded the room again. Clara immediately reached for her worn purse sitting beside the chair. I should go home. Sit down. I am not one of your employees right now. You collapsed in my building. His eyes locked onto hers. You are absolutely my concern. Clara laughed softly, though nothing about it sounded amused. That is funny coming from a man who fired 200 people before Christmas. Adrian went completely still. The silence after her words felt heavy enough to crack glass. Clara instantly regretted saying it aloud. But exhaustion had burned away her filter hours ago. Adrian slowly loosened his tie further. You think I enjoyed that? I think billionaires sleep fine either way. Something dark flickered across his face. Those layoffs saved 3,000 other jobs. Clara opened her mouth to respond but stopped. She had never heard him explain himself before. At work, Adrian never defended decisions. He made them. Coldly. Efficiently. Like emotions belonged to other people. You still looked calm, she whispered. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. That is because panic spreads. His voice softened unexpectedly. People expect me to stay standing when everything falls apart. Clara looked away first. Something about that answer unsettled her more than his usual arrogance. Because for 1 second he sounded tired too. Adrian stepped closer again until she could smell cedar and rain on his coat. Why are you doing this alone? Clara's fingers tightened around her purse strap instantly. That is not your business. The father is gone? Her stomach twisted. Do not. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Did he leave after he found out? Clara stood abruptly despite the lingering dizziness. I said do not. Her voice cracked this time. She hated herself for that. Adrian immediately moved forward as she swayed slightly. His hand closed carefully around her elbow before she could stumble again. Warm fingers. Steady pressure. Clara looked down at his hand like it physically betrayed her. I do not need saving, she whispered. Adrian's expression changed again. Softer now. More dangerous somehow. That is unfortunate, he said quietly. Because you look exhausted from trying to save yourself. Clara felt tears threaten instantly and hated him for noticing the exact moment her walls started cracking. She pulled her arm free and grabbed her coat. I am leaving. Adrian did not move aside from the doorway. Your apartment is 40 minutes away. I can take the train. Rain hammered harder against the windows behind him. At 3 in the morning. During a storm. After nearly collapsing. People survive worse every day. Adrian stared at her silently. Then his eyes dropped briefly toward her stomach again. The baby shifted beneath her blazer at the exact same moment. Clara saw something flash across his face so quickly she almost missed it. Fear. Real fear. Adrian stepped aside slowly and reached for his car keys. Fine, he said quietly. Then I am driving you home. Rain slammed against the windshield hard enough to blur the entire city into streaks of silver and gold. Clara sat rigidly in the passenger seat of Adrian Calloway's black Mercedes, clutching her purse tightly against her stomach, while soft classical music played through the speakers. The leather seats were heated. The air smelled faintly like cedar and expensive coffee. Everything about the car felt too quiet, too controlled, too intimate for 3:30 in the morning. Adrian drove with one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel, his attention fixed on the slick Chicago streets ahead. Even exhausted, he looked composed. Sharp jaw. Dark hair slightly damp from the rain. Expensive watch glinting beneath passing streetlights. Clara hated how unfairly attractive he looked while her own reflection in the window showed pale skin, swollen eyes, and exhaustion carved into every feature. You can stop glaring at me now, Adrian said suddenly. Clara blinked. I am not glaring. You have been glaring since we left the building. Maybe I enjoy consistency. One corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. That somehow irritated her more. Silence settled again while the windshield wipers swept rhythmically through the storm. Clara stared out at the sleeping city and wished her heartbeat would calm down. Being alone with Adrian outside the office felt wrong in a way she could not explain. At work there were conference rooms, employees, distance. Here there was only rain, darkness, and the dangerous warmth of his attention focused entirely on her. You should not have stayed that late, Adrian said quietly after several minutes. Clara laughed softly. You own the company that demanded the reports. I did not approve 16-hour shifts for a pregnant employee. Vanessa did. His jaw tightened visibly. I will deal with Vanessa. Clara turned toward him sharply. No, Adrian glanced at her briefly. No. I do not need you fixing things every time something gets difficult. This is not difficult. It is irresponsible. Heat flashed through her chest instantly. You do not get to judge me. You nearly collapsed. Because I cannot afford not to work. The words exploded out harder than she intended. Adrian went silent. Clara looked away immediately, ashamed of the crack in her voice. Outside, neon signs reflected across rain-soaked pavement, while the Mercedes glided through downtown traffic like a shadow. You think I enjoy this? She whispered after a moment. You think I want to spend every day pretending coffee is dinner because my paycheck disappears before the month even starts? Adrian's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Clara could not stop now. Exhaustion had stripped her defenses raw hours ago. Do you know what my landlord said this morning? He asked if I planned on raising a baby in a one-bedroom apartment with broken heating. Her throat tightened painfully. I smiled anyway. Because smiling is cheaper than crying. Adrian's expression darkened slowly. Dangerous silence filled the car. How long has the heating been broken? Clara stared at him in disbelief. That is what you took from that conversation? Answer me. 2 weeks. Adrian looked furious now. Not loud furious. Worse. Controlled furious. The kind that lowered his voice instead of raising it. Why did you not say something? Clara laughed bitterly. To who? My billionaire CEO boss. Yes. Why? She snapped. So you could throw money at the problem and feel heroic? Adrian slammed the brakes suddenly at a red light. The movement startled her enough that she gasped softly. He turned toward her fully for the first time since they left the office. Rainwater streaked across the windows behind him while city lights flashed through the darkness. You really think that little of me? He asked quietly. Clara froze. Something in his expression unsettled her. There was anger there, yes, but beneath it was something sharper. Hurt. Real hurt. She looked away first. I think men like you do not understand people like me. Adrian stared at her for several seconds before speaking again. Then explain it. Clara swallowed hard. People like me do not get rescued. The words hung heavily between them. Adrian's eyes never left her face. That is not true. It is for me. The traffic light turned green, but Adrian did not move immediately. Horns sounded faintly behind them before he finally pressed the accelerator again. The city grew quieter as they entered older neighborhoods lined with brick apartment buildings and dark storefronts. Clara folded her arms tighter against herself when she recognized the streets near her apartment. Embarrassment flooded her chest instantly. She had spent months carefully avoiding any situation where Adrian might see how she actually lived. The Mercedes slowed beside a narrow building with flickering hallway lights and chipped concrete stairs. Rainwater dripped steadily from rusted gutters overhead. Clara reached quickly for the door handle. Thank you for the ride. Adrian did not unlock the doors. This is where you live. Her face burned. Open the door. His gaze moved slowly across the building. The broken entrance light. The overflowing trash bins near the alley. The water stains running down the brick walls. Every second of silence felt unbearable. Clara. His voice lowered dangerously. There is no security here. I have survived. That is not the same thing. She turned toward him angrily. Stop talking to me like I am some tragic project. Adrian's expression shifted instantly. You think that is what this is? I think rich men like saving women who cannot say no. The second the words left her mouth, silence crashed through the car. Adrian went completely still. Rain hammered against the roof while Clara realized too late she had crossed a line she did not fully understand. His gray eyes darkened slowly. Not with anger. Something worse. Disappointment. I have never touched you without permission, he said quietly. Shame hit her immediately because he was right. Every late-night conversation, every glance, every moment of tension between them, Adrian had never once crossed that line. Not once. Clara looked down at her trembling hands. I did not mean. Yes, Adrian interrupted softly. You did. The doors unlocked with a sharp click. Clara grabbed her purse quickly and stepped out into the freezing rain before he could see tears threatening her eyes again. She hurried toward the apartment entrance, but halfway up the stairs another painful cramp twisted through her stomach hard enough to make her stop abruptly. Clara gripped the railing tightly and closed her eyes. Behind her, the Mercedes door opened instantly, and before she could force herself to keep walking, Adrian's footsteps were already coming toward her through the rain. "Do not tell me you are fine again." Adrian's voice came from directly behind her, just as another cramp tightened through Clara's stomach hard enough to steal her breath. Rain soaked through her thin coat within seconds while icy winds swept down the narrow street. Clara gripped the rusted stair railing tighter and forced herself to inhale slowly. She refused to cry in front of him again, especially after what she had just accused him of. Adrian stopped one step below her, close enough that she could feel his body heat even through the freezing rain. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. Clara kept her eyes shut. "It will pass." "That is not an answer." "Why do you care so much?" she whispered tiredly. Silence followed. She opened her eyes slowly and looked down at him. Rainwater clung to his dark hair and expensive coat, but he stood there like the storm did not touch him. Calm, controlled, dangerous in the quietest way possible. Adrian studied her face for a long moment before speaking. Because nobody should have to climb 3 flights of stairs looking like they are about to collapse. Claire almost laughed at that. Almost. Instead she straightened slowly and forced herself upward another step. Adrian moved beside her immediately. "Do not. I can walk. You are shaking. I am cold. You are exhausted." The words hit too accurately. Clara hated him for that. By the time they reached the second-floor landing, her breathing had grown uneven again. The hallway lights flickered weakly overhead, casting pale shadows across peeling wallpaper and cracked tile floors. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried faintly through thin apartment walls. Clara searched her purse quickly for her keys while trying not to notice Adrian silently taking in everything around him. The leaking ceiling stain above apartment 2B. The broken vending machine near the stairs. The smell of old heating pipes struggling against winter air. She finally unlocked apartment 3C and pushed the door open quickly before he could say anything else. "Thank you for the ride," she said quietly. "Good night." Adrian's gaze moved past her shoulder into the apartment. Then he went completely still. Clara realized too late what he saw. The tiny living room was barely large enough for the worn couch pressed against one wall. Unopened medical bills covered the kitchen counter beside a half-empty box of saltine crackers. A small portable heater blinked weakly near the window wrapped in plastic insulation. And in the far corner sat a white crib box still sealed shut because Clara had not figured out how to assemble it alone yet. Shame flooded her chest so violently it hurt. She stepped in front of the doorway immediately. "You have seen enough." Adrian did not move. "That heater is your only source of heat?" Clara crossed her arms defensively. "I am managing." His eyes shifted toward the kitchen counter. "When was the last time you ate something besides crackers?" "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Looking at my life like it is some problem you can solve." Adrian's jaw tightened. "It is a problem. Not yours." The hallway fell silent except for distant rain hitting old windows somewhere below them. Clara looked away first because holding his gaze suddenly felt too dangerous inside the narrow doorway. Adrian stepped closer slowly. "Why are you so determined to push me away?" Her throat tightened instantly. "Because men always left eventually. Because depending on people was how you got abandoned while pregnant and terrified and staring at overdue bills at 2 in the morning. Because trusting someone powerful enough to destroy your entire world with one decision was the fastest way to lose yourself." But she could not say any of that aloud. So instead she whispered, "Because people like you do not stay." Adrian stared at her for so long she could hear her own heartbeat. Then his eyes softened in a way she had never seen before. Barely noticeable, but enough to make something fragile shift painfully inside her chest. "Who hurt you?" he asked quietly. Clara felt tears burn instantly behind her eyes. "You do not get to ask me that." "Why?" "Because you are my boss." Adrian looked almost angry hearing that. "And if I was not?" Her pulse stumbled unexpectedly. The hallway suddenly felt too small. Too warm despite the freezing rain outside. Clara tightened her grip on the door frame. "That does not matter." It matters to me. The low honesty in his voice startled her more than shouting would have. She looked up before she could stop herself. Adrian was watching her like she was something delicate he was afraid to touch. The realization terrified her. A loud crash suddenly echoed from downstairs, followed by angry voices in the street. Clara flinched instinctively. Adrian noticed immediately. Does someone bother you here? No, another lie. I said I am fine. Adrian exhaled slowly through his nose like he was losing patience with every repetition of those words. Then his eyes moved once more toward the unopened crib box inside her apartment. You built none of it. Clara's face burned again. I have been busy. Without another word, Adrian stepped past her into the apartment. Clara's eyes widened instantly. What are you doing? He removed his soaked coat calmly and draped it across the chair near the kitchen. The crib. You cannot just walk into my apartment. Adrian loosened the cuffs of his expensive dress shirt while glancing toward the unopened box in the corner. Apparently I can. Clara stared at him in disbelief as the billionaire CEO of Callaway Capital rolled up his sleeves beside her tiny kitchen counter like he belonged there. Then he looked directly at her and said quietly, Sit down, Clara. You look like you are about to fall apart. Clara stood frozen near the apartment door while Adrian crossed her tiny living room like he had already decided leaving was no longer an option. Rainwater dripped from his dark hair onto the worn hardwood floor as he crouched beside the unopened crib box in the corner. His expensive watch flashed beneath the dim lamplight while he examined the packaging with calm concentration. The entire scene looked absurd. A billionaire CEO kneeling on her apartment floor at 4 a.m. beside discount baby furniture she bought on clearance. You seriously cannot stay here, Clara whispered. Adrian glanced up briefly. Watch me. Her mouth opened slightly before closing again. Exhaustion dulled her ability to argue properly. That irritated her even more. Adrian pulled a small utility knife from his pocket and sliced through the tape sealing the box. Where are your tools? Clara blinked. What? The instructions say assembly requires a screwdriver. I do not own one. Adrian stared at her for one long second. Then he reached for his phone. I have one in the car. Clara rubbed tiredly at her forehead. Of course you do. Something close to amusement flickered briefly across his face before disappearing again. He stood and crossed toward the kitchen. The small apartment suddenly felt impossibly crowded with him inside it. His shoulders nearly brushed the hanging light fixture. His coat draped over her chair looked more expensive than everything else in the room combined. Adrian opened her refrigerator quietly. Then he frowned. This is empty. Clara's stomach tightened. I was grocery shopping tomorrow. There is yogurt and half a bottle of orange juice. Congratulations. Your billionaire detective skills are impressive. Adrian shut the refrigerator slowly. Sarcasm does not change the fact that you are not taking care of yourself. I am surviving. Barely. The honesty in his voice hit harder than criticism would have. Clara looked away quickly and lowered herself carefully onto the couch before her legs gave out completely. The apartment heater rattled loudly beside the window, pushing weak warmth into the room. Adrian noticed her shiver immediately. Without speaking, he walked back over and draped his dry suit jacket across her shoulders. Clara inhaled sharply at the unexpected warmth still trapped in the fabric. Cedar. Rain. Him. I told you, she whispered. I do not need saving. Adrian crouched in front of her slowly until their eyes met. And I told you, he said quietly. That does not make me stop caring. The words settled somewhere dangerously soft inside her chest. Clara looked down immediately because holding his gaze suddenly felt impossible. Adrian remained there for another second before finally standing again. Stay there. You are very bossy for a man standing in someone else's apartment. You are very stubborn for someone who almost collapsed twice tonight. Clara folded the jacket tighter around herself and watched him disappear back down the hallway toward the stairs. The apartment felt strangely quiet without him in it. Too quiet. She hated noticing that. 10 minutes later, Adrian returned carrying a black toolbox in one hand and 2 grocery bags in the other. Clara stared at him in disbelief. You left. Briefly. He set the bags on the kitchen counter. The convenience store downstairs was still open. Clara pushed herself upright slowly and looked inside the bags. fresh fruit, soup, crackers, bottled water, prenatal vitamins. Her throat tightened instantly. Adrian, do not start. I cannot pay you back for this. I did not ask you to. Clara looked at the groceries again, suddenly unable to speak around the pressure building in her chest. Nobody had taken care of her in months. Not since the baby's father disappeared after seeing the positive pregnancy test sitting on her bathroom counter. The memory hit harder than expected. His silence. The slammed apartment door. The awful realization that she had become too inconvenient to love. Clara. Adrian's voice softened slightly. She blinked quickly before tears could fall. I am fine. Adrian exhaled quietly like those words physically exhausted him now. Then he carried the toolbox toward the crib parts scattered across the floor, and loosened the cuffs of his dress shirt another inch. Clara watched silently as he began assembling the crib with careful precision, completely at odds with the ruthless CEO everyone feared at work. His large hands moved surprisingly gently over tiny white wooden pieces meant for a baby he would never meet. You have done this before, she said quietly after several minutes. Adrian paused briefly before tightening another screw. Once. Clara frowned slightly. For family. Silence stretched long enough that she regretted asking. Then Adrian answered without looking at her. For my daughter. Clara froze completely. Adrian kept working steadily beneath the dim apartment light. His expression never changed, but something colder settled into the room anyway. She died when she was 6 months old, he said quietly. The words hit Clara like ice water. Adrian? Leukemia. His voice remained calm in that terrifying, controlled way wealthy, powerful men learned when grief became too expensive to show publicly. Her nursery looked almost exactly this size. Clara could not breathe for a moment. Everything suddenly made horrifying sense. The way he looked at her stomach. The fear every time she winced in pain. The impossible tenderness hidden beneath all that cold control. Adrian tightened another screw carefully before finally looking up at her. His gray eyes looked darker now. Older somehow. So forgive me, he said softly, if watching you slowly destroy yourself is becoming difficult to ignore. The apartment fell completely silent after Adrian's confession. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, but even that sound seemed distant now. Clara sat curled beneath his suit jacket on the couch while Adrian finished tightening the final screws on the crib without another word. The soft lamp beside the kitchen cast warm light across his broad shoulders and tired face. For the first time since she met him, he did not look untouchable. He looked human. That frightened her more than his coldness ever had. What was her name? Clara asked quietly. Adrian's hand stopped moving for half a second. Evelyn. The answer came softer than expected. Clara swallowed against the ache rising unexpectedly in her chest. That is beautiful. Adrian stared down at the small crib for a moment before standing slowly. Her mother chose it. Clara noticed the way he said mother instead of wife. Another careful distance. Another hidden wound. Adrian stepped toward the kitchen sink and washed his hands quietly while Clara watched him from across the room. Exhaustion settled heavily into her bones now that the adrenaline from earlier had faded. But underneath the exhaustion was something else too. Something dangerous. Compassion. She hated how much she suddenly wanted to know what happened to him. You never talk about your family, she said carefully. Adrian dried his hands with a paper towel before looking at her again. Neither do you. That is different. Why? Clara looked away first. Because nobody writes magazine articles about me. Adrian almost smiled at that. Almost. Then his phone buzzed sharply against the kitchen counter, cutting through the fragile quiet between them. His expression hardened immediately when he saw the screen. Clara recognized the shift instantly. The billionaire CEO was back. Calloway, he answered coldly. Silence. Then his jaw tightened. How did he get that address? Clara frowned slightly. Adrian's eyes moved toward her. Dangerous now. Focused. Do not let him upstairs, he said into the phone. Clara's stomach dropped instantly. What happened? Adrian ended the call slowly. Someone is downstairs asking for you. Ice flooded her chest. There was only one person it could be. A loud pounding suddenly echoed through the apartment hallway outside. Clara physically flinched before she could stop herself. Adrian noticed immediately. Every trace of softness vanished from his face. Clara. His voice lowered dangerously. Who is out there? She looked toward the door with panic spreading through her entire body. You need to leave. Another pounding knock rattled the apartment harder this time. Clara. A man's voice slurred faintly through the hallway. I know you are in there. Adrian's entire posture changed. Stillness. Coldness. The kind powerful men wore right before destroying something. Clara stood too quickly from the couch. Please just go. Who is he? It does not matter. It matters if you are scared. The pounding came again. Louder now. Open the damn door. Clara wrapped both arms protectively around her stomach while humiliation burned through every inch of her body. Of all nights. Of all moments. Adrian looked toward the door once before returning his attention to her face. Is he the father? Clara's silence answered for her. Adrian's jaw flexed sharply. How long has he been bothering you? He just wants money. From you. She nodded weakly. Adrian looked genuinely stunned by that. You barely have enough to survive. Clara laughed bitterly. Apparently that has never stopped him before. Another violent knock shook the door. Clara, I am not leaving without talking to you. Adrian took one slow step toward the entrance. Clara moved instantly in front of him despite her exhaustion. No, his eyes narrowed slightly. Move. I mean it. So do I. Adrian. Her voice cracked with panic. Please. He stopped immediately hearing that tone. Clara hated how easily he noticed fear in her now. He drinks, she whispered. He gets angry when people challenge him. Adrian stared at her silently for one long second. Then his expression changed into something terrifyingly calm. Did he ever hurt you? Clara looked away. That was enough. Adrian inhaled slowly through his nose before loosening the cuffs of his dress shirt again with deliberate precision. Stay here. Adrian, do not start something. I am ending something. The quiet certainty in his voice made her pulse stumble. Another pounding knock echoed through the apartment. I know your car is outside, the man shouted. Who the hell is in there with you? Adrian's gray eyes darkened instantly. Then he walked toward the door with slow controlled steps that somehow felt far more dangerous than shouting ever could. Clara's heartbeat slammed painfully against her ribs as he unlocked the deadbolt. Adrian. He glanced back at her once. You should sit down. Then he opened the door. A tall man in a wrinkled leather jacket stumbled slightly in the hallway light. Mid-30s. Unshaven. Smelling faintly of whiskey even from across the room. His irritated expression immediately shifted when he saw Adrian standing there instead of Clara. Who the hell are you? Adrian's face revealed absolutely nothing. You woke her. The man blinked in confusion. Excuse me. Adrian stepped into the hallway slowly, blocking the apartment entrance completely with his broad frame. You are disturbing a pregnant woman at 4:30 in the morning. The man laughed harshly. That pregnant woman owes me money. Clara closed her eyes briefly in humiliation. Adrian remained perfectly still. How much? The man smirked suddenly. Depends who is asking. Something cold flashed behind Adrian's eyes then. Calculating. Ruthless. Clara recognized that expression from corporate boardrooms moments before someone lost everything. Interesting answer, Adrian said softly. Because I was about to ask why a man who abandoned her suddenly remembers she exists. The hallway fell dead silent. And for the first time all night, Clara realized Adrian Calloway was furious on her behalf. The man in the hallway stared at Adrian with growing uncertainty, like instinct was finally warning him he had picked the wrong door tonight. Rainwater dripped steadily from the fire escape outside the hallway window, while weak fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Clara stood frozen inside the apartment, clutching the edge of the kitchen counter so tightly her knuckles hurt. Listen, the man said with forced confidence. Whatever Clara told you, this is between us. Adrian remained perfectly still. Your name? Derek. Last name? Why? Adrian's expression never changed. Because I asked. Derek shifted uncomfortably beneath the weight of that calm voice. Morrison. Adrian nodded once, like filing the information away somewhere dangerous. Mr. Morrison, you arrived intoxicated at the apartment of a pregnant woman you abandoned. Derek scoffed loudly. She loves acting like some victim. Clara flinched before she could stop herself. Adrian noticed instantly. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. Careful, Adrian said softly. Derek laughed nervously. Who are you supposed to be anyway? Her lawyer. Adrian glanced once toward Clara behind him before returning his attention to Derek. No, the single word landed cold and sharp. I am the man currently deciding how much patience I have left for this conversation. Silence crashed through the hallway. Clara's pulse hammered painfully in her ears because she had never seen Adrian like this outside the office. Controlled fury was somehow far more terrifying in a cramped apartment hallway than across a polished conference table. Derek straightened slightly. Look, I just came for what she owes me. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Money for what? Derek hesitated just long enough to answer everything. Adrian saw it too. Clara could feel the shift in him instantly. Dangerous. Calculating. You took money from her. Adrian's voice remained calm. Repeatedly. Derek's expression hardened defensively. She said she needed help during the pregnancy. So you charged her for abandoning her? Clara shut her eyes briefly. Shame burned through her chest again. She hated this. Hated Adrian seeing every ugly broken piece of her life laid open in front of him. Derek pointed toward the apartment angrily. You do not know anything about us. Adrian finally stepped closer. Slow. Controlled. Dominating the narrow hallway without raising his voice once. Derek immediately took half a step back. You are correct, Adrian said quietly. I do not understand men who disappear when responsibility becomes inconvenient. Clara looked up sharply at that. Something flickered across Adrian's face for one brief second. Old grief. Old rage. Gone almost instantly beneath cold control again. Derek scoffed loudly to cover his discomfort. Whatever. I just need $500. Clara's stomach dropped. Derek, I told you I do not have it. He ignored her completely while staring at Adrian instead. Unless rich boy here wants to pay. Adrian reached slowly into the inside pocket of his coat. Clara's eyes widened instantly. Adrian, no. Derek smirked triumphantly. See? That is all this is. Adrian removed a sleek black wallet calmly and pulled out a business card instead of cash. Here. Derek frowned while taking it. Then his face changed completely, reading the name printed beneath the silver logo. Callaway Capital. Chief Executive Officer. Adrian Callaway. The hallway fell dead silent. Clara could practically see panic beginning to crawl across Derek's expression. Wait, he said slowly. You are that Callaway? Adrian said nothing. He did not need to. Derek looked suddenly aware that the man standing in front of him controlled more wealth than he would see in 10 lifetimes. Clara hated the small ugly satisfaction that gave her. I did not realize. Derek started awkwardly. Clearly. Adrian's voice cut through him like ice. Derek shifted again while gripping the business card tighter. Look, maybe I came at a bad time. You came to extort a pregnant woman. I would not call it extortion. Adrian tilted his head slightly. Interesting. The quiet menace in that single word made Derek pale slightly beneath the hallway lights. Clara pushed herself away from the counter and stepped forward quickly before things escalated further. Just leave, Derek. He looked toward her with sudden irritation. You think you are better than me now because some billionaire is standing here? Clara's exhaustion snapped painfully. No, she whispered. I think I am tired. Derek opened his mouth again, but Adrian spoke first. You will not contact her anymore. Calm. Absolute. Derek laughed nervously. You cannot tell me what to do. Adrian stepped closer one final time. Actually, he said softly, I can. The silence afterward felt enormous. Derek looked from Adrian to Clara and back again before finally muttering under his breath and shoving the business card into his jacket pocket. Fine. Whatever. He turned toward the stairs angrily. This whole thing is pathetic anyway. Clara released a shaky breath as his footsteps disappeared downstairs. But the relief lasted only 2 seconds before another sharp cramp twisted violently through her abdomen. Stronger than before. Her knees buckled instantly. Clara. Adrian caught her before she hit the floor. Pain ripped through her lower stomach hard enough to steal her breath completely. She gripped Adrian's shirt with trembling fingers while panic exploded through her chest. "Something is wrong," she whispered breathlessly. Adrian's face changed immediately. Every trace of cold control vanished beneath raw fear. "Look at me." His voice sounded sharper now. "Urgent. Where does it hurt?" Another cramp hit before she could answer. Clara cried out softly and folded against him while dizziness crashed through her vision. Adrian lifted her into his arms instantly like she weighed nothing at all. "No," Clara whispered weakly. "I do not want a hospital again." Adrian looked down at her with terrifying focus, already reaching for his phone. "Too bad," he said hoarsely. "Because I am not losing another child tonight." The emergency room lights blurred above Clara as Adrian carried her through the private hospital entrance like the entire world had narrowed down to keeping her breathing steadily in his arms. Rainwater soaked the shoulders of his black coat. His jaw looked carved from stone beneath the fluorescent lights. 31 weeks pregnant, he snapped toward the approaching nurses. Severe abdominal pain. Stress contractions. Everything moved instantly after that. Nurses rushed forward with a wheelchair. Doctors appeared from nowhere. Hospital staff recognized Adrian Calloway immediately, but none of them dared waste time staring. Clara gripped his shirt weakly while another cramp twisted through her body hard enough to make her cry out softly. Adrian lowered her carefully into the wheelchair without letting go of her hand. "I am right here," he said quietly. The words cut through the panic enough to steady her breathing for one fragile second. A nurse pushed Clara quickly through automatic doors while another attached monitors around her stomach. The sound of the baby's heartbeat suddenly filled the room in rapid, uneven bursts. Clara burst into tears immediately hearing it. Adrian remained beside the bed while doctors moved around them adjusting machines and speaking in urgent medical language she barely understood. "Blood pressure is climbing. Possible preterm labor. Get fetal monitoring stable." Adrian's face grew colder with every sentence. But Clara noticed something nobody else did. Fear. Real fear. The kind that hollowed out his eyes beneath all that control. A gray-haired physician finally stepped toward them after several tense minutes. "Mr. Calloway." Adrian looked up sharply. "Talk." "The baby is still stable for now, but her stress levels are extremely dangerous." Clara looked toward the monitor desperately while gripping the hospital blanket tighter around herself. "Is my baby okay?" The doctor softened slightly. "Right now, yes. But you need immediate rest and observation tonight." Adrian exhaled slowly beside her like he had been holding his breath for the past 20 minutes. Clara turned her head weakly toward him. "You can go now." Adrian looked genuinely offended. "Excuse me. You already did enough." "Apparently not." "Adrian." Her voice trembled with exhaustion. "Your meeting in Tokyo." His expression hardened instantly. "I do not care about Tokyo." Clara stared at him. "That deal is worth hundreds of millions. Billions. Then why are you still here?" The room fell quiet except for the steady electronic rhythm of the baby's heartbeat, echoing through the monitors. Adrian stepped closer slowly until he stood directly beside her bed. "Because last time I left a hospital room thinking everything would be fine," he said quietly. "My daughter never came home again." Clara's chest tightened painfully hearing that raw honesty beneath his controlled voice. Adrian looked down briefly at the monitor strapped across her stomach before speaking again. "I am not repeating that mistake." Tears burned instantly behind Clara's eyes. She turned away before he could see them. A knock interrupted the moment. One of Adrian's assistants stepped carefully into the room holding a tablet and phone. "Sir," the assistant said cautiously, "the board is demanding an answer about Tokyo." Adrian never looked away from Clara. "Cancel it." The assistant froze visibly. "Sir, the investors already landed from Singapore. Then they can enjoy Chicago." "But the merger vote," Adrian's voice dropped lower. "More dangerous." Did I stutter? Silence. "No, sir." The assistant hesitated once more before lowering his voice carefully. "Vanessa Sterling has also been calling repeatedly asking why you left the building with Clara." Clara closed her eyes briefly. Of course Vanessa already knew. Adrian's expression turned glacial instantly. "Tell Miss Sterling that if she contacts Clara tonight, security will remove her from the building permanently." "Understood." The assistant disappeared immediately afterward. Clara stared at Adrian in disbelief. You cannot destroy people's careers because of me. Adrian looked down at her calmly. Watch me. She should have been angry. Instead, warmth spread painfully through her exhausted chest. Nobody had defended her like this before. Nobody powerful had ever chosen her over something important. Adrian sat slowly in the chair beside her hospital bed and loosened his tie completely for the first time all night. The exhaustion on his face finally became visible beneath the cold billionaire mask. You should sleep, Clara whispered. So should you. I mean it. Adrian leaned back slightly in the chair without taking his eyes off the monitor tracking the baby's heartbeat. I already told you. His voice softened almost dangerously. I am not leaving. Clara watched him quietly beneath the pale hospital lights. The ruthless CEO who terrified entire boardrooms now sat beside her bed at dawn with rain still drying on his coat and exhaustion dark beneath his eyes because he refused to walk away from her. The realization felt far too intimate. Too dangerous. Her fingers shifted unconsciously against the blanket. Adrian noticed immediately. Of course he did. Without speaking, he reached forward slowly and covered her trembling hand with his own. Warm. Steady. Safe. Clara's breath caught instantly. Adrian looked down at their hands briefly before meeting her gaze again. Neither of them moved. The air between them shifted into something softer now. Something fragile and terrifying at the same time. Then the baby kicked hard beneath the monitor. Clara gasped softly from the sudden movement. Adrian froze completely with his hand still wrapped around hers. Slowly, almost cautiously, his eyes dropped toward her stomach again. Then he whispered something so quietly she almost did not hear it. Hey there, little one. And for the first time since Clara met Adrian Calloway, the cold billionaire looked at her unborn child with unmistakable love. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the hospital blinds, painting pale gold across the quiet private room. Clara woke slowly to the steady rhythm of the fetal monitor, and the unfamiliar warmth wrapped carefully around her fingers. For one disoriented second she thought she was dreaming. Focused completely on her within 1 second like he had never truly fallen asleep at all. What is wrong? He asked quietly. Clara blinked. Nothing. His expression turned skeptical immediately. You looked uncomfortable. I was adjusting a pillow. Adrian relaxed back slightly, though his fingers still remained around hers. The doctor said your contractions stopped around 5 this morning. Clara looked toward the monitor automatically. The baby is okay? Stable. Relief washed visibly through her entire body. Adrian noticed that too. He noticed everything. You should have woken me if something changed, she whispered. Adrian looked almost offended. I was not sleeping. Clara glanced pointedly toward his tired eyes. Sure. One corner of his mouth moved faintly. It disappeared almost immediately, but she saw it. The sight startled her enough that she forgot to look away. Adrian's expression softened slightly beneath her gaze. Dangerous mistake. Clara pulled her hand free too quickly and focused on the blanket instead. You missed your merger because of me. Correct. Most people would resent that. Most people are not me. She swallowed against the warmth those words created inside her chest. The hospital room suddenly felt too small again. Adrian stood slowly and crossed toward the coffee machine near the window. Tea or coffee? You are still acting like this is normal. Answer the question, Clara. Tea. Adrian nodded once and prepared it himself instead of calling a nurse. Another detail that unsettled her. Powerful men were not supposed to do small gentle things personally. They delegated, controlled, ordered. But Adrian stood beside a cheap hospital coffee station at 7 in the morning making tea for her with the same focus he probably used during billion-dollar negotiations. Why are you really doing this? Clara asked quietly. Adrian paused briefly before handing her the warm cup. I already told you. No, she looked up at him carefully. You told me about your daughter. That is not the same thing. Silence settled heavily between them. Adrian stared out the hospital window toward the city skyline for several long seconds before speaking. After Evelyn died, he said quietly, I learned something unpleasant about grief. Clara listened without moving. People become uncomfortable around it. Friends stop calling. Family starts speaking softer. Everyone wants you to recover quickly, Because your sadness reminds them bad things happen randomly. His voice remained calm, but Clara heard the exhaustion buried underneath every word. Eventually you stop talking about it because watching people pity you becomes worse than the silence. Clara's throat tightened painfully. Adrian turned toward her slowly. Then I met you. Her pulse stumbled instantly. Me. You looked exhausted the first day I saw you. Clara frowned slightly. At work. Adrian nodded once. You stayed 2 hours late helping another assistant fix an accounting error she caused herself. Clara barely remembered that night. You noticed. I notice everything inside my company. The quiet confidence in his voice should have sounded arrogant. Instead it sounded honest. After that, Adrian continued softly, I started seeing patterns. Clara looked down at the tea trembling slightly between her hands. Adrian stepped closer slowly. You skipped lunches. Worked through migraines. Pretended you were fine every single day. His gray eyes locked onto hers. And every time I asked if you needed help, you looked at me like kindness was a trap. Clara felt tears burn instantly behind her eyes because he was not wrong. Adrian's voice lowered further. Do you know what finally made me angry? She shook her head weakly. You looked more comfortable suffering alone than trusting anyone. The words hit too deeply to defend against. Clara stared down at the blanket while emotion tightened painfully in her chest. Trusting people usually costs me something, she whispered. Adrian crouched slowly beside her bed until they were eye level again. And what has it cost you to trust me? Clara opened her mouth immediately, then stopped. Because somehow despite everything, Adrian had only protected her since the elevator doors opened. The realization frightened her all over again. Adrian studied her face quietly before lifting one careful hand toward her cheek. He stopped just short of touching her, giving her room to pull away. That, he said softly, is the first time you did not look at me like you hated me. Clara's breath caught sharply. Neither of them moved. The air between them shifted again into something warm and dangerous and impossible to ignore. Then a knock sounded sharply against the hospital door. Both of them looked up instantly as Vanessa Sterling stepped into the room wearing a perfectly tailored cream coat and an expression that froze completely the second she saw Adrian beside Clara's bed. Vanessa Sterling recovered quickly. Too quickly. Her perfectly polished smile slid back into place as she stepped farther into the hospital room carrying a sleek leather handbag in obvious disbelief, hidden beneath careful professionalism. Adrian, she said smoothly, the board has been trying to reach you for hours. Adrian stood slowly beside Clara's bed. Every trace of softness disappeared from his face so completely it almost felt unreal after the conversation they had just shared. Then they should try harder, he replied coldly. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward Clara, toward the hospital monitors, toward Adrian standing far too close to her bedside. Calculation flashed behind her expression instantly. Clara recognized it because she had spent months surviving it inside the office. I did not realize Clara's condition was this serious, Vanessa said lightly. You left so abruptly last night. Adrian's gaze sharpened dangerously. You approved a 16-hour shift for a pregnant employee. Vanessa blinked once. The merger deadlines were critical. Not more critical than her child. The room went silent. Clara felt her pulse stumble hearing the possessiveness buried beneath Adrian's calm voice. Vanessa heard it too. Clara watched her entire expression tighten almost imperceptibly. Of course, Vanessa said carefully. I simply assumed Clara would communicate if she needed accommodations. Clara almost laughed at that. Vanessa had ignored every request she ever made. Every reduced schedule form mysteriously disappeared. Every maternity accommodation somehow delayed. Adrian folded his arms slowly across his chest. Interesting. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. Adrian stepped toward her with terrifying calm. Because human resources records show Clara submitted 3 separate requests for reduced overtime during the last month. Clara froze completely. Vanessa's face changed instantly. There must be some confusion. No, Adrian's voice dropped lower. The confusion is why those forms were never processed. Silence crashed through the room. Clara stared at Adrian in shock. He investigated. While she was unconscious in a hospital bed, he investigated. Vanessa recovered quickly. Adrian, This is hardly the appropriate place. You assigned her weekend audits after learning she was high risk. His gray eyes looked glacial now. You also increased her workload 30% above department average. Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. She never complained. Adrian looked toward Clara briefly before returning his attention to Vanessa. That is because she thought nobody would protect her. The quiet fury in his voice stole Clara's breath. Vanessa noticed too. Her expression sharpened immediately with something uglier now. Jealousy. This is becoming inappropriate, Vanessa said carefully. People in the office are already talking. Adrian did not blink. About what? Vanessa hesitated just enough to answer everything. Clara's stomach tightened instantly. Vanessa, she whispered softly. Do not. But Vanessa ignored her completely while staring at Adrian instead. You spent the entire night alone in a private hospital room with an employee. Her tone remained smooth, professional, cruel. People are going to make assumptions. Adrian's expression never changed. Let them. Clara's heartbeat stumbled again. Vanessa looked genuinely stunned by the answer. Adrian, she said carefully, you have investors, public appearances, a reputation, and... Vanessa glanced toward Clara with thinly disguised disgust now. This woman has become a liability. The second the words left her mouth, the atmosphere inside the room changed completely. Adrian went still. Clara had seen powerful men angry before. Loud angry. Reckless angry. But Adrian's silence felt far worse. Controlled. Precise. Deadly calm. Get out, he said softly. Vanessa blinked. Excuse me. Adrian stepped closer slowly. You deliberately endangered a pregnant employee. Ignored medical accommodation requests. Then walked into her hospital room and called her a liability. His eyes locked onto hers with terrifying focus. Get out before I forget you work for me. Vanessa's face paled. You cannot speak to me like this over an assistant. Adrian's jaw flexed sharply. Watch me. Clara's pulse hammered painfully in her chest. Nobody defended her like this. Nobody ever had. Vanessa laughed suddenly, but it sounded brittle now. This is unbelievable. You are risking your entire reputation over her. Adrian did not even look toward Clara this time. Yes. The single word hit the room like thunder. Clara stopped breathing for a second. Vanessa stared at him in open shock. Adrian reached into his coat pocket calmly and removed a folded document. Your termination paperwork is already being processed. Vanessa's face drained of color. You fired me? No, Adrian's voice remained cold enough to freeze the air. You fired yourself the moment you endangered someone under my protection. Under my protection. Clara felt warmth crash painfully through her exhausted chest hearing those words. Vanessa looked toward her with sudden hatred sharp enough to cut. Do you really think this ends well for you? Clara flinched instinctively. Adrian moved instantly between them. Leave. Vanessa's composure finally shattered. You are throwing away years of loyalty for a pregnant nobody who trapped you with pity. The hospital monitors beeped faster beside Clara instantly. Adrian's expression darkened with terrifying stillness. Then he spoke quietly enough to make the entire room feel cold. One more insult toward her, he said. And security will escort you out of this hospital personally. Vanessa stared at him for one final furious second before grabbing her handbag sharply and storming toward the door. But before leaving, she looked directly at Clara. The entire company will hear about this by noon. Then she disappeared. Silence flooded the room afterward. Clara stared down at the blanket over her shaking hands while humiliation spread through her chest. Adrian. He turned toward her immediately. Softer now. No. She is right. She is unemployed. Despite herself, Clara almost smiled. Almost. Adrian stepped closer to the bed again. But this time his expression carried something heavier than anger. Concern. Look at me. Clara obeyed slowly. Adrian's voice lowered. You did nothing wrong. The sincerity in his face made her chest ache. Clara swallowed hard. Everyone at work is going to think. I do not care what they think. But I do. Adrian studied her quietly for one long moment before his eyes dropped toward her trembling hands. Then, without hesitation, he reached down and laced his fingers carefully through hers again. Warm. Certain. possessive enough to steal her breath. Then let them think whatever they want, he said softly. Because I am done pretending you matter less than you do. By noon, the rumors had already spread through every floor of Callaway Capital. Clara could feel it the second Adrian wheeled her through the executive lobby in a private hospital wheelchair 3 days later. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Assistants looked away too quickly. Executives pretended not to stare. The entire building buzzed with silent speculation beneath polished corporate smiles. Clara wanted to disappear. Adrian looked completely unaffected. One hand rested calmly on the wheelchair handle, while the other remained tucked inside the pocket of his charcoal coat. Cold, controlled, untouchable. But every few seconds his eyes dropped toward Clara, automatically, like checking she was still there. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor in complete silence. Clara immediately noticed the absence of Vanessa Sterling's voice echoing through the department. Her desk sat empty behind the glass HR office. No framed photographs. No designer coffee mug. Nothing. Adrian noticed Clara staring. Security escorted her out yesterday morning. Clara swallowed hard. You really fired her. She endangered you. The simple certainty in his voice unsettled her every single time. Adrian guided the wheelchair toward his private office suite, while employees quickly moved out of his path. Clara could feel them staring. The pregnant assistant. The billionaire CEO. The scandal already writing itself inside people's heads. The private office doors closed behind them with a soft click, shutting out the noise of the company instantly. Clara released a shaky breath she had been holding since the lobby. Adrian crouched beside the wheelchair immediately. Pain. No dizziness. No. You are breathing too fast. Clara looked away. Everyone thinks I slept my way into your office. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. Nobody with intelligence believes that. That is not exactly comforting. Adrian stood slowly and crossed toward the massive windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass now, covering rooftops and traffic below in pale winter light. I spent 15 years building a reputation powerful enough to survive gossip. He turned toward her again. You should not have to. Clara stared down at her hands folded tightly across the blanket covering her legs. Maybe Vanessa was right. Adrian went completely still. Dangerous silence filled the room. Explain. Clara forced herself to keep speaking despite the ache tightening in her chest. Your investors already hate this situation. The board probably does too. Her voice lowered quietly. I am becoming a problem for you. Adrian crossed the room slowly until he stood directly in front of her again. Look at me. Clara obeyed reluctantly. His gray eyes locked onto hers with unbearable intensity. You are not a problem. Adrian. No, his voice dropped lower. You spent so long convincing yourself that surviving quietly was the same thing as having value. Clara felt tears threaten instantly. Adrian crouched in front of her again, close enough that she could see exhaustion beneath his eyes from the past sleepless days. I am getting tired of hearing you speak about yourself like you are temporary. Her heartbeat stumbled painfully. Before she could answer, a sharp knock interrupted them. Adrian straightened immediately. His assistant stepped carefully inside looking tense. Sir. The investors from Singapore moved the merger presentation to tonight's gala. Adrian's expression darkened. I already postponed that. They are threatening to withdraw completely if you do not appear publicly. The assistant hesitated briefly before continuing. And several media outlets are requesting statements regarding the hospital rumors. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Of course they were. Adrian remained silent for one dangerous second. Then he asked calmly, how many reporters? At least 30 confirmed outside the ballroom. The assistant looked visibly uncomfortable now. Sir, the board strongly recommends you attend alone tonight. Silence crashed through the office. Clara felt her stomach tighten immediately. Adrian looked toward her slowly. She knew that look. He was deciding something. That is a terrible idea, she whispered instantly. Adrian ignored her. Prepare the car for 7. The assistant blinked. Sir. Adrian's gaze never left Clara's face. She is coming with me. Clara's eyes widened. Absolutely not. The assistant looked trapped between fear and confusion. Should I inform security? Yes. Adrian's voice remained perfectly calm. Double the detail. The assistant disappeared quickly after that. The second the doors shut, Clara pushed herself up from the wheelchair too fast. Have you completely lost your mind? Adrian moved instantly when she swayed slightly. One hand steadied her waist automatically. Warm. Strong. Too familiar now. Careful. Do not careful me. Her voice cracked with panic. There will be cameras everywhere tonight. Correct. People already think we are having an affair. Adrian looked down at her steadily. And Clara stared at him in disbelief. You are willing to risk your entire reputation over gossip? Adrian's hand remained firm against her waist, while snow drifted silently beyond the office windows behind him. No, he said quietly. I am risking it over you. The honesty in his voice stole every remaining thought from her mind. Clara's pulse hammered wildly as Adrian stepped slightly closer. Do you know what I realized in that hospital room? He asked softly. She shook her head weakly. His eyes dropped briefly toward her stomach before returning to her face. I was already more afraid of losing you than protecting myself. Clara's breath caught sharply. The room suddenly felt too small. Too warm. Adrian's fingers tightened slightly at her waist as if he noticed the exact moment her knees weakened again. Adrian. His gaze lowered toward her mouth for one dangerous second, then back to her eyes. Tonight, he said quietly, nobody humiliates you again. Clara could barely breathe around the terrifying tenderness in his voice. And somewhere deep inside her chest, the part of her that spent years surviving alone started wanting something far more dangerous than survival. Snow drifted softly across downtown Chicago as black luxury cars lined the entrance of the Grand Meridian Hotel beneath flashing camera lights. Clara stood frozen beside the tinted window of Adrian's Mercedes, while reporters crowded behind security barriers outside the ballroom entrance. Her hands trembled against the dark blue maternity gown Adrian's assistant had somehow delivered to the hospital that afternoon in exactly her size. The fabric flowed gently over her stomach instead of hiding it. Elegant. Soft. Beautiful in a way Clara barely recognized. I cannot do this, she whispered. Adrian sat beside her in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, watching the chaos outside with calm indifference. Yes, you can. There are cameras everywhere. I noticed. Clara looked toward him helplessly. Adrian, one photograph changes everything. His gray eyes met hers steadily. It already changed. The quiet certainty in his voice made her pulse stumble. Outside, reporters shouted questions toward arriving executives, while flashes lit the snow-covered entrance in bursts of white light. Clara suddenly felt 16 years old again. Small. Out of place. Unwanted. Adrian noticed instantly. He always did. Look at me. She turned toward him slowly. Adrian reached across the seat and carefully took her trembling hand into his own. Warm. Certain. Nobody out there decides your worth tonight. Clara swallowed hard against the emotion tightening her throat. What if they destroy you over this? Adrian's thumb brushed softly across her knuckles once. Clara. His voice lowered gently. I was already destroyed once. The grief hidden beneath those words stole the air from her lungs. Adrian leaned slightly closer. You did not ruin my life. His eyes held hers completely now. You are the first thing that has made it feel alive again. Tears burned instantly behind her eyes. Before she could answer, Adrian stepped out of the car and rounded the vehicle through falling snow. The moment he opened her door, camera flashes exploded across the street. Reporters surged forward behind security ropes. Mr. Calloway, is the affair confirmed? Who is the pregnant woman? Did you cancel the merger because of her? Clara froze completely. Panic climbed sharply into her chest. Adrian extended one hand toward her calmly through the chaos. Come here. The entire world seemed to hold its breath waiting for her answer. Clara looked at his hand. Strong. Steady. Patient. Nobody had ever waited for her before. Slowly, she placed her trembling fingers into his. Adrian closed his hand around hers immediately and helped her carefully onto the snowy sidewalk. The reaction was instant. Cameras flashed harder. Reporters shouted louder. But Adrian never loosened his grip. Not once. Security moved around them quickly while they crossed toward the ballroom entrance together. Clara tried to focus on breathing instead of the overwhelming noise surrounding them. Adrian stepped closer the second he noticed her shaking. "Stay beside me." His hand shifted protectively against the small of her back. Warm. Possessive. Safe. The grand ballroom doors opened ahead beneath crystal chandeliers and gold light. Hundreds of investors, executives, and media representatives turned toward them instantly the second Adrian entered with Clara beside him. Silence spread through the entire room in waves. Clara's heartbeat thundered painfully in her ears. Adrian guided her forward without hesitation. Calm. Unshaken. Like standing beside her publicly was the easiest decision he had ever made. Whispers exploded across the ballroom. Clara caught fragments everywhere. "That is her. The assistant. She is pregnant." "He brought her here?" Her chest tightened painfully. Adrian felt it immediately. He leaned slightly toward her without breaking stride. "Do not look at them. They hate me." "No," his voice remained low and steady. "They fear me." Before Clara could respond, one of the senior board members approached looking horrified. "Adrian," the older man hissed quietly. "What exactly are you doing?" Adrian's expression never changed. "Attending my gala. With her." Silence crashed across the nearby tables. Clara instinctively stepped back half an inch. Adrian noticed instantly. Then something inside him seemed to finally break. Cold control disappeared beneath something far more dangerous. Feeling. Adrian turned slowly toward the ballroom stage where the merger presentation screen still glowed behind the podium. Then, without releasing Clara's hand, he guided her directly toward it. Panic spread instantly through the investors. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes exploded again. "Adrian," Clara whispered breathlessly. "What are you doing?" He looked down at her briefly. His eyes softened in a way that stole every remaining breath from her lungs. "Ending this." The ballroom fell completely silent as Adrian stepped onto the stage with Clara beside him beneath hundreds of stunned eyes. One of the reporters shouted first. "Mr. Calloway, are the rumors true?" Adrian looked out across the room calmly. Then he pulled Clara gently closer against his side in front of every camera in Chicago. Gasps spread instantly through the ballroom. Clara's heart nearly stopped. Adrian's hand rested carefully over hers against the curve of her stomach, while snow drifted beyond the towering ballroom windows behind them. "You wanted a statement," he said quietly into the microphone. The room hung on every word. Adrian looked down at Clara for one brief devastating second before lifting his gaze back toward the crowd. "Then here it is." His arm tightened protectively around her waist. "Nobody humiliates this woman again." Silence. Complete silence. Adrian's voice lowered further. Softer now. More dangerous because every word carried truth. "She is under my protection." Camera flashes exploded wildly across the ballroom. Clara could barely breathe around the emotion crashing through her chest. Adrian turned fully toward her then. Right there beneath crystal chandeliers and flashing lights and the entire city watching. His fingers lifted carefully to her cheek. Gentle. Reverent. "You spent so long surviving alone," he whispered only for her. Tears slipped free before Clara could stop them. Adrian smiled softly for the first time since she met him. Real this time. Warm enough to break her heart completely open. "You do not have to anymore." Then he kissed her. Slow. Certain. Not hidden. Not rushed. A promise instead of a secret. And for the first time in years, Clara Whitmore stopped feeling afraid of being loved.